Representative Tulsi Gabbard is politically unpredictable. Not so much chameleonic, it's just that she's hard to peg ideologically. But one of the things she is kind of a truth teller, and by that I mean she calls it as she sees it, and she sometimes has her finger on the pulse of very big things that are happening in the culture. Watch.
The mob that stormed the Capitol on January 6th to try to stop Congress from carrying out its constitutional responsibilities were behaving like domestic enemies of our country. But let's be clear. The John Brennans, Adam Schiffs, and the oligarchs in big tech who are trying to undermine our constitutionally protected rights and turn our country into a police state with KGB-style surveillance are also domestic enemies and much more powerful and therefore dangerous than the mob that stormed the Capitol.
Now, for her to call out Schiff and Brennan in this way, I think is fantastic and very brave for a Democrat. And you can kind of see here why the Democrats tried to throw her. They threw her off the debate platform. They can't control her. I also think that her analogy to the KGB, now to some people it may seem a little bit far-fetched. Oh, we're not the Soviet Union. But I think Tulsi Gabbard's point is that things can move in a very bad direction and sometimes pretty fast. And we've seen that happen, by the way, in lots of places. The Nuremberg laws have been called a dress rehearsal for the Holocaust. The Nuremberg laws, you can say, quote, merely made Jews into second-class citizens, but it wasn't a very long step from there to rounding them up and sending them into ovens. And all of that happened really in the space of a few years. My wife Debbie will tell you that when Hugo Chavez was elected in 1999, he said, "I'm not a socialist." And in fact, for several years, his radical, extreme socialist policies didn't kick in. He didn't even start the Socialist Party of Venezuela until several years later, 2007 or 8, I believe. So what Tulsi Gabbard is saying is there are disturbing trends in America that are pushing us in a very frightening direction. And I'd like to support that by looking at a couple that I've just almost picked up, you may say, right around me. So here's a story from the Washington Post. The Washington Post had a story from the 2019 campaign, very eye-opening. They were following around Kamala Harris, and they talked about a scene in which Kamala Harris is mocking a guy in prison begging for food and water. She goes, "A morsel of food, please," Kamala said, shoving her hands forward as if clutching a metal plate, her voice now trembling like an old British man locked in a Dickensian jail cell. "And water! I just want water!" So, basically, this is what I would call reporting at its finest. Why? Because it captures an aspect of someone's personality. It shows that here's someone who has a very low regard for people, likes to see people in a cringing position and laughs. You know, this is like some Iranian mullah laughing at a dissident in prison or laughing at someone who's having their throat cut. It's a disgusting side of Kamala Harris, and there it is in the Washington Post. So, here's the key point of the story. The Washington Post went back and deleted that anecdote. This is called erasing history. The problem was the anecdote was too telling. Saint Kamala is now in the White House along with Biden. And it can't be very good for her image to see her laughing at some guy begging for food in prison. It doesn't make her look good. So let's go and, in an Orwellian fashion, remove that story. Here's another interesting story from the New York Times. Son tipped off FBI about his father who is charged in Capitol riot. Quote, "I put my emotions behind me to do what I thought was right," says Jackson Reffitt. The guy turns in his own dad. And he goes, "I put my emotions behind me." This is not just your emotions. This is the person who has worked his whole life to give you a life. This is someone who brought you in part into the world along with your mom. This is somebody who has made untold sacrifices for you, sacrifices they don't expect to be reciprocated. There are other cultures where parents look after the kids, but the kids are then expected to look after the parents. That's not the case in American culture. But is it too much for a parent to expect a modicum of respect, a modicum of gratitude? But no, you've got this kid who not only does something horrible, but feels good about it. This is right, I'm going to quote now directly from Orwell. Nearly all children nowadays, we're talking now about in the world of 1984, of complete tyranny, nearly all children nowadays were horrible. What was worst of all was that by means of such organizations as the spies, they were systematically turned into ungovernable little savages. And yet this produced in them no tendency whatever to rebel against the discipline of the party. On the contrary, they adored the party and everything connected with it. All their ferocity was turned outwards against the enemies of the state, against foreigners, traitors, saboteurs, thought criminals. It was almost normal for people over 30 to be frightened of their own children. That's Orwell. Is that not an echo of the world we are living in now? And then we have censorship. Censorship not just in digital media, but censorship, proposals for censorship of all media. Here's Anand Giridharadas, a fellow Indian. It's always exasperating for me when fellow Indians reveal themselves to be unbelievably stupid and tyrannical. They're ruining the reputation of Asian Americans and Asian Indians in this country. We're supposed to be nice people. We're supposed to be funny. We're supposed to be smart. But Anand Giridharadas is none of the above. Here's what he says. Is it time for this question to be front and center? Should Fox News be allowed to exist? This guy literally thinks it is a government decision whether Fox News should be allowed to exist. So private media companies should not be allowed to exist. Why? Because according to this clown, from his point of view, they're putting out misinformation. Obviously, who gets to decide what misinformation is, Anand? What if we decide you're putting out misinformation? Should we, some collective we, get to shut you up? Oh, no, Dinesh, I'm a very clever Indian. I'm putting out very thorough information. So this is the voice of tyranny speaking. This is what Tulsi Gabbard is warning about. And my only advice to Tulsi is, sadly, it is your side. It is the Democrats who are leading this effort. And so, since you are already onto them, I'd like you to think about exiting that side and joining the side of freedom.